progress.
Everyone to the LTD Finance Committee meeting, and let's begin with roll call. Lawrence Green.
Present.
Gino Grimaldi.
Here.
Okay, we are here. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Don't know of any. Okay. We can cross this off. We are moving right along here. Okay. Is there any public comment? Anyone signed up?
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to business updates, discussions, and presentations, and we'll start with Pam for the long-range financial plan, 2024 to 2033. Wowza.
How's that? There we go. All right. So good evening. Tonight is our second review of our draft 24 to 33 long-range financial plan. And we will be reviewing mostly what's changed in the plan from the last time we saw it back in November with the full budget committee meeting. And then we will also be getting an update on the community investment plan from Matt. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this diagram should look familiar by now. We are currently in the February-March section. The CIP and long-range financial plan update will be moving quickly to hearing the full budget for fiscal year 25. That will be next budget committee meeting at the end of April. And then we'll have a budget hearing at the board meeting in May, and then we'll plan for adoption at the June board meeting. So, okay, you can go to the next slide. All right, so key inputs to our long-range financial plan is in addition to all the different things that we look at in the initial plan that we did in November, today's draft version will be focusing on using the fiscal year 23 actuals, our current fiscal year 24 budget, and some preliminary fiscal year 25 budget information. We are, for our staffing, we're currently reviewing the fiscal year 25 staffing requests. And in today's plan, we've used an increase of 6% over the fiscal 24 budget to estimate our fiscal year 25 cost. Then a decreasing amount to level out at a 4% increase in future years. For our tax revenues, they are continuing to be based on historical trends, and our LTD tax rate, just as a quick reminder, has been increasing slightly ever since 2016, and it will level out at the 0.08% in 2025. These rate increases make up a relatively small portion of our tax increases. Job growth and wage inflation at approximately 4% are the key drivers of our tax revenues. For our operational data, we have adjusted the service data and operator staffing to match the strategic business plan service metrics. The operations data has been analyzed to identify specific cost and revenue relationships, and this information will be used to project the impact of service changes. We also look at other short and long range plans, and there hasn't been a large update in any of the other plans at this point, other than the CIP, which does have a major impact on our long range financial plan. In the area of transfers, the focus of the long-range financial plan is operational and specifically for our general fund resources and requirements. However, the other programs at LTD that the general fund supports are reflected in transfers from the general fund. And we did not make any large increases at this point in those transfers, but we will be continuing to consider those as we put the fiscal year 25 budget together. So in summary, we utilized over 30 assumptions and our 20 years of historical actuals. In this second analysis, we, as I mentioned, mostly used current information and our current budget and what I'm seeing right now in the budget request for fiscal year 25. Okay, next slide. Some of the trend changes that I'm seeing is when we originally had talked to the directors and chiefs about putting together fiscal year 25 budgets, I had given them a goal to try to keep their requests to, but as I'm reviewing their budget requests, I can see that we're going to need to adjust that to go a little bit higher in our materials and services area. So in this plan, I built a larger upfront adjustment and then tapered off to the current cost of living amount. So I added a 6% over the current year budget amount for the fiscal year 25, and then tapered that down to a 3% CPI as we went on through the long-range financial plan. Healthcare costs are still at the 7% level, and we are just actively looking at different options in different ways that we can try to be sure and keep that at 7% or possibly less. That would be nice. We are continuing our federal assistance in fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. We had decided a couple of years ago that we would use 2.2 million of our federal formula funds that is allowable for operational expenses, and that's what is built into the budget for 24, and will continue on into 25 based on what we estimated the total formula funding to be. After that, in fiscal year 20 and 26, we're going to go back to what we were using before, which was a 4.2 million. So that I'm talking specifically about our formula funds, which are able to, these are FTA grant funds, a portion of which can be used for capital expenditures, but there's also a portion that you can use for operational purposes. And so built into this plan is an increase in the amount that we're going to be using for operational purposes, but we're not increasing it over the level that it used to be. So it went down for a couple of years to 2.2, and now we're just going back to the 4.2. We also do still have about 14.8 million of COVID relief funds, which I will be just once each year that I do the budget, I'm going to look and see, okay, how much of this is available? Well, we know how much is available. How much do I want to use this year? We do have an extended period of time to use this particular set of COVID funds, but in the long-range financial plan right now, I have it set so that it's allocated over this first 4 years as needed. So our STIF funding is new into the long-range financial plan, the one you saw in November and then continued on into the one today, is STIF money in our operational area. We did have one portion of the STIF money, which was for the student transportation services that all along we've been using for operational purposes. This is a new source, and it's tied to increasing our service levels. And we are still planning to increase the service level slightly so that we will be able to access a portion of that STIF funding for operational purposes. There was a question about, how is that going to be determined and how will that be calculated? And tomorrow night, when we talk about our audit results, there's a particular page in the statistical information that that I will show you where to find that page, but there's a lot of historical data which will clearly show that what our costs per revenue hour and our cost per mile and boarding have gone, pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic. So we do plan to leverage that data to be able to show that we certainly have an increase in costs now for our service and for operations. So CIP updates, of course, Matt will talk about those in a few minutes. And then also are new in this plan. And then a couple of other changing trends. Our inflation in our original plan, the inflation was still, was coming down, but was still a little bit on the high side. So as it continues to go down, we're building that into our long range projections. However, going the other direction are technology costs. So we are trying to stay ahead of those cost increases. And when you see the budget this year, you'll see a big dramatic increase in those costs. But part of that is things that we've been updating and then are coming online and have been covered by capital grants and now are becoming part of the operating budget. And some of them are just increases in things that have to be done to stay current. Another item is our aging fleet equipment. These are not the actual vehicles themselves, but there's peripheral equipment that we have noticed over the last few months that as it's starting to age out, we have plans to be replacing that, but some of it can't wait. And the ones that can't wait have to be paid for with our operating budget. The other changing trend is, of course, our labor contracts. We have a tentative agreement on the IT, and then we're just beginning our public safety officers agreement, and that one will be effective on July 1st. So, all right, next slide. Okay, for our operating revenues comprise about 7% of our total revenue. Currently, fares and group passes are trending above budget for fiscal year 24, and so that is a good sign. Oops, and then the other impact on our operating revenues are, as I mentioned, we updated our service estimates. And so I put the service estimates on there as a comparison to be able to show that we are still estimating an increase of service for a couple of years here, and then we'll be leveling out. At least that is the current plan. So, okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, here's just a graphical of our passenger fares. So it shows that over the 10 years, we have an average projected increase of 6.93%. And by comparison, our last long-range financial plan, the percentage amount was just above 5%. So we're actually a little bit higher on our fare increases than we had estimated last time. So, okay, next slide. Our non-operating revenues are the bulk of our revenue with, this is 93% of our total revenue, with payroll taxes being 77% of our total revenue. Payroll taxes are also trending above budget this year. So as we get closer to the end of the year, we will adjust. We may adjust this again. We'll see how it comes out. And then it'll also have an impact on our fiscal year 25 budget amount. So on the federal and state assistance, the FTA, one of the things we were worried about with the federal assistance is each year we have to submit service data in the fall called the NTD report. And we weren't sure, this will be the first year that we basically hadn't been held harmless by them using pre-COVID information to be able to calculate our formula funds. So just recently, the FTA released their formula fund allocations for this next year, and then they made a point of stating that they will also extend that hold harmless for at least one more year. So those of us who haven't gotten back our service to our pre-COVID levels, they will base our formula apportionment on the higher of where we are now or where we were. So that is really great news for us. And so we had, and again, we were talking about the 2.2 million and going to the 4.2 million. And I was a little nervous about that the last time that we were looking at our long-range financial plan, but knowing that what the FTA had decided to do, I'm more confident that we will be able to access that funding and still have enough left for our capital projects. And then state assistance, we already talked about that. The STIF is slightly increased for our increased services. So, and then interest, I want to just spend a second talking about the interest because we have our money that we have is invested in the local government investment pool, which is currently right about 5%. And I keep watching locally, you know, because we have had a bank or two that's approached us and said, you know, gee, we'd love to be your person for your investments. But so far, we haven't found anybody who can beat what we're doing at the local government investment pool. And the nice thing about that pool is it operates like a money market. So I don't have to worry about losing an interest amount. If I have to take an amount out, you know, I can transfer money easily back and forth. So currently that's where we have our money invested, but we will still keep looking at our local partners to see if we can do better or at least as good as that locally too. So, okay, all right, next slide. All right, so this is the graphical of our tax revenues, and you can see that they do continue to go up, even though our tax rates are going to top out at the beginning of 2025 at 0.008. That impact is only about $700,000 a year, which is not a small amount of money, but comparatively a small amount of our tax revenues. This growth is mainly based on the Oregon economic analysis, and I do look at that throughout the year and adjust what we think this rate of increase is going to be. So, and over the 10 years, we have right now, it's the increase is averaging at 4.3% a year, which is probably it's probably a little bit on the low side. So, and then this just shows how variable our grant revenue is. I think that is the biggest reason I put this in here because our grant revenue is very dependent on just what is happening and what's going on. In the general fund, it doesn't vary quite as much, but when you then bring in all of our capital projects, then that does make the grant revenue piece of this go tend to go up and down more. So. All right, you can go to the next slide. All right, operating requirements personnel services are 77% of our total requirements. Materials and services are 22%, and then 2% is insurance, which doesn't sound like very much, but the last time I ran this, our insurance was only 1%. So, and that is one of the areas that we saw a large increase in going into. Our budget this year was in liability and property insurances. Personnel services include our service increases. We talked about the CBA with the bus operators through 2026. Trying to match our annual wage increases to the CPI out 2 or 3 years down the road, and then our medical cost max at 7% per year. Our materials and services, I mentioned, I did give it a little bit bigger bump from 24 to 25 because it just looked like that's where we were going to be. And then after that, we'll estimate it at 3%. But we'll see how that goes, of course, when we look at each individual year's budget. And then the insurance and risk had a 20% growth this year. And then hopefully that's that'll get us up to where it will be, and then it'll level out at our regular CPI growth. So as far as our bus operators and the actual staffing level, this plan is based on service levels, as I mentioned in our strategic business plan. We currently have 180 bus operators. We need to get up to 215 to really service or be able to effectively increase our service. And in the long-range financial plan in the fall, we basically had that over 2 years. But in the most recent service estimates that I had gotten from planning, that's actually stretched out a bit more over 4 years, although we are actively recruiting. And if we're able to get to that level in 2 years, that will be great. But this particular plan is actually based on us taking 4 years to get to the full 215 active operators. Administrative staff levels are basically flat, other than a few areas that are impacted when the service level increases. So, all right, next slide. So this is just a graphic of that. There's a big jump between 23 and 24. That was when the operator CBA went into effect. And then from 24 to 25, as mentioned, there's a 6% increase, 25 to 26, 5%. And then after that, I put a 4% annually for personnel services. Okay, next slide. Materials and services, something a little bit similar. You can see how it's going up right now. It's going up a lot quicker because we're still catching up from high inflation and also the increasing technology costs. And then after that, then I show more of a gradual increase. So back to just trying to match the CPI at that point. And then, of course, all of these amounts will be updated once we get the fiscal year 25 budget set. Then we'll redo all of these amounts. So, okay, next slide. All right, transfers are forecast to be flat, other than the capital projects, which is tied to the timing. A possible change will be additional STIF funds that could be applied to RideSource in the current biennium, possibly fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. And that would directly reduce the amount of general fund transfer that would be needed to support the RideSource service. So we are waiting to hear from the state on that. So, okay. Next slide. All right, so this is the bottom line, total revenue minus total requirements. So the second draft of our long-range financial plan looks very similar to our first draft, with varying levels of surpluses and deficits. The major impact on those, the varying levels, are really the CIP needs and the timing of those projects. But it is important to know that our actual spending, as mentioned, will be based on our annual budget, and any shortfalls will be made up with our current working capital. So let's take a look at our working capital. That's the next slide. So our working capital continues to be at a strong level. Over this long-range financial plan, this plan uses about 9 million of our working capital, but it does leave us with about 12 million at the end in 2033. And that is actually 5 million higher than what we had estimated in our first draft of the long-range financial plan. Yeah.
But just for reference, tell me what the working capital is today, and tell me what the working capital is 5 years out.
Okay. Yeah.
The number.
I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger here too. Okay. So our working capital today is at the end of 2023, we had 35.4 million in unrestricted working capital. And then we set aside a portion of that for the unappropriated ending fund balance. Okay. And so after that, then it's 22.7 was available. And then 5 years, so that would be 2028, that was 18.6. And then at the end, we have 12.2.
That's
And-
pretty good.
Yes, yeah, that's a very, very good place to be. Yeah. So, and this does not include, and I know we talked about this before, but this does not include our sustainable services reserve. So we do still have that in our back pocket, which is strictly used to smooth out any unanticipated downturns.
And I'm assuming that in this forecast, you're projecting something that won't happen, which is you'll spend every penny that's budgeted.
We will try not to spend every penny.
But these numbers reflect spending the budget.
It does. Yeah, yeah. So it does reflect spending that.
Which never happens.
Yeah. You know, well, if you budget conservatively, you know, low on revenues, high on expenditures, and you make those two balance, then yes, you normally do not spend the total budget
Okay.
requirements. So okay. And then just a couple of comments in conclusion. Next step is to complete the fiscal year 25 budget. And we are continuing to seek alternative revenue sources and tracking our cost drivers as we are always looking for ways to improve efficiency. With our new business intelligence department, then I think that is really going to help us a lot to be able to zero in on particular areas and trends that it'll make it that have been much harder to see previously, just because it takes a lot of data crunching. So I am really looking forward to working closely with our business intelligence team to look at some of those get down into the minutia and look at the trends. We are looking forward to our technology investment returns, even though our operating costs of our technology is going up. We have invested a lot in our new technology, particularly our financial software, and we're already in our finance department seeing that there's part processes are becoming much more efficient and much easier for us to process in our department. So we're really looking forward to the next year, and particularly as all of those modules come online. And then, of course, our transition to the area mobility manager. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
Does this forecast contain anything related to our retirement plans and possible
It does
changes?
not. Yeah, and that will, we will be, once a decision is made on that, then we'll be working that in. Now, what is included in here is what we're currently doing, which is all of the current contributions at their contribution rates and the level dollar payment. And we do know that a piece of that level dollar payment has the ability to, well, it'll be fully amortized in 2 more years, could possibly drop off. That's about $900,000 a year, according to Milliman, who we just talked to last week. That is not included in here. I'm just continuing that. We'll continue to make the contributions at the current level. Okay. All right. So the next time you see this, then it'll be in June, and we'll be asking for approval and adoption. But if you have any questions in between, don't ever hesitate to email me or give me a call.
I do have a question. The budget, does it include any of the activities or the ideas that we had talked about at the board retreat, sort of expansive, kind of the visionary things. Is that built in there? Is there going to be
Yes.
budget?
Go ahead, Jameson.
Yeah, so what you'll see coming before you will be representative of some of those pieces.
So, all right, thank you. Mhm.
Excuse me. Good morning, or afternoon, close to evening. Finance Committee, pleased to present. This is, you guys have seen this before. We'll be sharing some of the updates. And just to level set, there's a lot of slides, but there's really an appendix that kind of after the questions that really go more into words for the project descriptions, as well as going back to kind of our driving force. You see that the strategic business plan. So you'll have some of those in reference in the back. So don't worry, we're not going to go and read all of those together, but that does provide you reference if you're wanting to ask a question. So we'll switch to the next slide. And just the agenda, look at our community investment framework. This is a driving force in how and why we bring forward some of the projects. We'll talk about the framework, and then we'll get into some of the projects together. The next slide talks through timeline. Pam's presentation really talked about the timeline. This is just another example of, as we're going through this right now, we were talking in March about the proposed CIP. And we will be releasing these for public comment through the budget process. And then we'll come through in May or June, looking like June, really for the adoption of the budget. That includes the CIP, Community Investment Plan. Next slide. So that framework, this is to show you, and hope you guys can see it. So I know it's pretty small on the screen, but you have an iPad, so that's helpful. Really, we have foundational guiding principles that really hold this up. We have an inputting process. That input process can come from visionary folks that, the board retreat. Ms. Cox, you referenced, there's some aspects, and you'll see that represented in our CIP. There's a project specifically to address some of those things that we're looking at. So there's ways for project proposals to come in. That can come from department staff trying to respond to needs that come in, as well as community members, as well as the board, if you have some that you want to bring forward. There's vetting. Not every project finds itself in here. There's a vetting process that we need to go through to make sure that we can move those forward. And then the tier system. So we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Our commitment to not show every project. Sometimes those are planned projects. So those tier 3, as we referenced before, they'll find themselves outside of our first 3 fiscal years that you'll see, really to say this could be a project, we're looking at this, but if we don't have the funding, we're not going to bring it forward, and we're actively looking at it. Tier 1 is really, we have secured a grant, we're moving forward with that project. Tier 2 is we've identified that, and now we're going through some of those requirements. The example I use with the tier 2 is we have a building project. We do have to go through a requirement of NEPA, which allows FTA as well as others to input to say, yes, we agree with this project. You can move forward. However, we need to see some of those documentation that you guys aren't impacting the environment negative. So before we can have an fully executed grant, some of those processes have to occur. So that would be a tier 2 project. We see ourselves getting it. We know it. We've talked to our regional partners. It's just that final execution for a signed grant. And then again, adoption occurs. That would be through our budget committee, and then ultimately the board. You guys give your blessings on the budget, which includes the community investment plan. Any questions there? And just for my own presentation, if you guys have any questions, I try to look at everyone. If you have anything, please interrupt me. I love the quote, and so you guys are going to hear it. It's communication, the illusion that it actually happens is one of the most dangerous things in communication. So I want to make sure that you guys fully understand in your roles. So the next slide will show our plan. This is a 10-year plan. We also are identifying our forecast. So as you look at that, you'll see the 2024 forecast in that yellowish color. And then kind of bracket it in the next 3 years as we talk. You won't see anything in the plan in the next 3 years. So fiscal year 25, 26, and 27, all of those will find themselves as a tier 1 or tier 2 project. And then as you go out from fiscal year 28 to fiscal year 34, those are what we're seeing and anticipating. Fiscal year 2034 is the new year that's getting brought in. So that's why it has another bracket. So this looks relatively similar. I will highlight a few projects. The main one, which is an add here, is the last project called Passenger Boarding and System Improvements, SGR. SGR is State of Good Repair. And that's a new project. What we've identified is there are needs out that we need to respond to relatively quickly. We've had so you'll see the 200,000 and then it ramps up in fiscal year 26 to 250,000. This is a new project. However, what we did in the improvements that we'll talk about later is we reduced the requests that we were having there. It was about 500,000. So we essentially split that up. So we know that there's going to be needs and there is needs that we need to respond to quickly. And so that's a new project listed in this and the projects under our State of Good Repair.
Could you describe that a little more?
The
What
project
is-
itself?
What is it?
Yeah, so we have assets throughout the system. So passenger boarding. So when we are out in the system, there are times when concrete's failing that we need to make sure that, hey, let's respond to those in a way that we're efficient and quickly able to do that. So some of that, there'll be poles that may get hit or may need to get replaced out in the system. So just having assets in the community, we want to be able to respond quickly to that. So those were just a few examples.
So you're talking about bus stops?
Bus stops, absolutely. Thank you. Wait, passenger boarding. No. And there it does go beyond a little bit of just not bus stops, but other assets that we have out there, public facing. Fleet, we've talked about fleet, but they're the largest cost center as you look through the State of Good Repair, which makes sense. So you have the major bus components. Some of those would be engine replacements, hybrid components that we're needing to get into, batteries. So that's this 10 years we're looking at what we'll need to replace for a bus throughout the whole life of the asset. 10-year fixed route fleet replacement, which is the largest within fleet, and those are replacing our buses in a minimum of or a 12-year span. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for us to replace buses, but that's what that line item is for. Yes.
Where are we with the whole, I just went blank on the term, but the whole idea of being able to get things on time, and there was just sort of a big gap with COVID. Has that sort of?
Oh, does
Yeah,
it take
that's
time to get stuff? Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're seeing disruption. And so from a fleet perspective, I'm not the expert. If we need to bring in Eric Evers, he'll happily, but it's tough with supply shortages. I think one of the major things with our electric vehicles that we're seeing is the lead times associated with that. So you're not seeing people store batteries in shelves. I think sometimes it's those made to order components. So there's definitely impact still occurring. The further we can plan out and schedule, the more helpful it is to level that out. So there are definitely things you're needing to respond to as a result of failure. Hopefully we can respond more preemptively before that major failure. But it is still a problem, and you see that personally in some of the supply chain issues that we're seeing personally, but that does impact us.
You mentioned that you vetted some projects, and that means projects have not made it on the list. What's an example of a project that has been left
By the wayside?
Yeah.
Good question. So some we've deferred. An example within this plan that probably, as we're looking at it, is deferring and this is an improvement. I apologize, I'll switch to the other ones, but is the bringing in a new propulsion technology. So some of those, maybe that's visionary or what we're seeing, but those we just can't afford. right now from an operational standpoint. Some of those are also, we just haven't had identified funding. That's in the plan. Some of those are also technology related. People, and you're seeing costs increase from technology, but some of those are like, hey, we want this new and updated system. And we have to vet things out a little bit more to say, just because it's shiny and a shiny new toy, we just got to make sure we have the business case for that. And you'll see that in the actual policy itself, is we want to look at life cycle costs more than just saying this is a great tool. We've had, and some of those are ongoing conversations. There's a conversation going on around content management, which is technology rich. That we just don't have enough information to understand what does that mean as a project, to understand not only the upfront capital cost, but the ongoing investment for our operational costs.
So it sounds like you're doing a good job meeting the capital needs with the budget presented. And the things that are left behind are things that require additional thought, or there's just not ready in terms of its maturity for technology and things like that.
Correct. And there are going to be some things that come up that you want to respond to, but as far as where we stand fiscally, I think we always want to do that. And as we'll talk later, investing in our assets that we have right now is valuable for us, and there's a large effort. And when you look at dollars, fleet's the largest one there, and that makes sense because we are a company that moves people, connecting our community, which that is a main driver in what we do. I can switch to the next, and this is, and again, does anyone have any questions about any project? I don't want to leave. Okay. So this one was a question of what has changed. So there's a lot of things that change. Just going back to what I talked, and those changes, a lot of them are, we added another year. So as you look, you'll see on the far right is a total. Please don't get super alarmed as you see some that show a large increase. A lot of times that's just because we added an additional year to the plan. But I'll go through some of these projects. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. But the first one is our bus wash improvements. This is an improvement project. A project where we took our old bus wash that was well beyond its useful life and upgraded it. Part of that is we were also extending it into our fleet bay, bay 16, where a lot of the deeper cleaning goes. And we just haven't executed on seeing that project go as fast as we want. We're still in design for some of those components. So you're seeing some work happening, but we were projecting 130,000 spend this year. We're not spending that. So we're pushing some of those dollars over. I start with the hardest one first because it is an increased cost. As you look those 2 years there, it's more than 130,000, which we thought we were forecasting in this current fiscal year, 24. But the dollar amount for this fiscal year, next fiscal year, actually increased as a result of some of the construction portions of that. Our Gateway Station, this is just going from a tier, we don't have funding for it, so it's getting pushed out to outside of that 3 years. So we haven't identified funding for that project. The exciting one, where I'm excited for it, is our admin roof. If you want to look to your guys' left, and if you come in, our roof is as old as this building, which is over 34 years. So we've tried to do some things, but it's time for an upgrade for that. So we actually were able to secure funding, which is starting the domino to allow us to continue and move forward with construction, which is exciting. So we haven't had that mapped out fully, but it is an exciting one that as we look at next fiscal year, we're going to do a roof. When you talk to legislators, they're not super pumped about we love this project. We're going to get a competitive grant. So we are using just some local funds, but it is grant funded, which we're excited for. But again, going back to that state of good repair, we don't want to be leaking on anybody. As far as our operations command center, so that's the project that we have in the improvements category. We are putting solar on there. As far as the retrofit, it's just replacing standing seam with standing seam. We always had that one in there just to note, but the timeline is increased, which is exciting. Glenwood Petroleum fuel system. This is an upgrade to some of the work we had out at our fuel bay. So this allows us to monitor it remotely. We aren't fully complete with that, so we have some dollars rolling over from this fiscal year to next fiscal year. So you see an underspend this fiscal year and more of a spend next year. Passenger boarding, state of good repair. That's the one that I highlighted. This is a new project. We were never showing that. This is a new ad. And then transit facility, state of good repair. It's just continually, and you'll see, we thought we were going to spend more. We're underspending. We were projecting over 600,000, and now we're about $500,000. So some of that work gets deferred to next fiscal year. That's for facilities. Technology, you can kind of go through the similar vein. We'll start with the ERP, since Pam said she loves it in regards to the work we're doing here. That's our improvement project. We thought we were going to get it further along. We're underspending about 100,000 is what we're forecasting. So those dollars are bleeding into next fiscal year. IT hardware and software, you can kind of see the trend going forward, but we're underspending about 20,000, but there's a larger increase next fiscal year. You see that of 310. Some of those are project related and needs that have surfaced that we're going to be investing in. And you're seeing IT do that in regards to throughout the industry, where larger costs for keeping our systems in a state of good repair are fluctuating. All right. The other ones are just changes. Any questions on that page? All right. Fleet is the next one. Fleet, you'll see that when we get buses and when we're anticipating buses, that changes. So happy to report as of today, we actually have 2 of our MX vehicles, the green ones that have come in. The fleet team are actually inspecting it to make sure things go through the quality control process internally before we release that out into the public. But we do have 2. That's not like buying a vehicle where you take it a day, look it over, and put it on the road. There's a process that needs to occur, but this is something the board approved. And we have 2 new MX vehicles on site, which is exciting for the team. Any specific? Okay. All right, and here's the graph. And this just shows kind of where we're at. Just as much as you can, you want to level the spend out as evenly as you can. You see there's ebbs and flows. Going back to what Pam said earlier, some of those ebbs and flows impact what the transfer is to her, to our overall budget. But you see a large drop, I'll highlight in fiscal year 2031. You'll see your orange bar, which is the fleet. There's a large decrease on there. And mainly there's a lot less buses purchasing in that year, just because it's a little bit of off cycle in regards to where we're purchasing. So overall orange, the fleet will continue to be the largest in there. You'll see a large bump in IT for the state of good repair. And those are driving factors as we have a mobile video system that we're going to be moving forward with. And so that's a relatively high cost for next fiscal year. And that's why IT is larger in the gray. Next slide. Improvement projects. Really consistent. The main changes are when you're having a tier 3 project, you're going to see that move past the 3 years that I've talked about before. I want to highlight regional mobility enabling technology. That's the second from the bottom. So we're actually seeing this, and this is part of mobility management. LTD is actively seeking a project and submitted a project that will help us pilot something for how do we meet the needs in the Bethel area. So have identified funding, or we're seeking funding, and it's an exciting project for the district, but that is going to be a larger increase and nothing we really showed previously. And so you're seeing that come forward. So that finds itself within the 3 years because we have we didn't secure funding, but we have identified funding that we're seeking for. If we don't receive the grant, then that project won't move forward in its totality.
Matt, is that a model program?
It's it's the Attain grant. It does have technology, and I look to my peripheral, and Tom, who helped put the grant together, can speak more directly to what that is, because Tom enjoys adding context.
Table.
Welcome.
Thank you. Real briefly, this grant was, as Matt alluded to, a federal grant program, the Attain grant. I'll have to look up what that stands for exactly, but it's focused on technology development. And interestingly, it's actually being managed by Federal Highway Administration because they're looking at a broad range of so it's not just transit, it's all forms of transportation. We've applied for a grant, again, with the focus of the intent being on technology development. We've submitted an application that would develop an app, if you will, that would have something that we don't have in the apps that we have today, which is something that is a tool for us on the planning side of things, looking at the various modes that are available, kind of the supply, and then creating a technology that engages the demand for those services. So, we chose as a pilot to work with Bethel School District. And so the initial rollout would be tested at Willamette High School with high school students. And then, of course, then we'd be rolling that out to the broader Bethel community. But the intent of the technologies that would help us and help users of broader mobility actually start to be able to piece together a mobility on demand services is going to be the part of the pilot. But I was just talking with Brody Hilton today, the bike share manager for Cascadia Mobility. We'd be able to tie in bike share and our buses. So if you're going from the Bethel community to downtown, you might find a mobility on demand that gets you to the nearest bus stop, and then you take the bus stop onward. So that's what that is.
Has it been created yet?
No.
So what I'm model program, sort of doing it here and then it can be.
Exactly. One of our key partners, and I should say one of our key partners would be ODOT. Not that we're not interested in sharing this with the rest of the country, but ODOT would be able to actually leverage the distribution of this kind of technology statewide. So it's exciting.
So yes is the answer.
Okay.
So from that, any questions about any other projects listed? Great. Here's just an overview of the changes that you see from the last time we presented and pushed on. Again, just to not be redundant, most of those are getting pushed outside if they didn't have identified or secured funding. The Eugene Station modernization being an example of again, maybe underspending what we thought this fiscal year and pushing some of those costs to next fiscal year. And if you haven't been there, it's an active construction site. So it's pretty exciting to see what's happening and occurring there. Today actually being the time where we moved our operations break room because we were updating that. We moved them into a temporary break room today, and then pretty soon they'll find themselves back into a new break room after construction. So fun work going on there. And so that's the facilities. The next one will be going to frequent transit network, safety and security, and safety and amenities. And if anyone has any questions about any of those changes, please ask. Moving right along. So this graph just shows graphically what's happening in the year of spend and where we're forecasting it. Like I shared last time, you'll see a large cost in 2023. And that's seemingly as projects get stacked up, as we're looking for and seeing an identified need, we still need to secure funding for that. And once that gets brought in, some of those costs will be leveled out. So they're large costs. The main large driver comes from that alternative fuels infrastructure. If LTD continues to move down that or go down that path, then that infrastructure will need to find itself here. And that's a large capital cost that we don't have any identified funding for. This next one brings it all together for not only state of good repair, but the improvements section. I'll allow you to look at that. The red line identifies what's state of good repair. So the stuff below that is the state of good repair portion of the community investment plan. The things above that is the improvements. This overall is a large dollar amount, identified as over 271 million throughout in this case, the 11 years, as we're accounting fiscal year 24 into the forecast. Next is core questions. Hopefully you guys had an opportunity to ask any question you want along the way, but still happy to answer anything else.
I'll be smiling like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. When you say seeking funding, who does that mean, seeking funding? Is that?
I can take that. So, there's certain programs out there where they're cyclical. So there's, you're looking at it to try to figure out, but FTA or other funding puts out a NOFO, which stands for Notice of Funding Opportunity. And as those come out, and we're a part of many programs, or people are fully aware. So I get an email, Jameson gets an email, probably most of the people get it. And you're looking at it to say, does any of the projects that we show in our community investment plan make sense for that? So that would be one opportunity. The Attain is one most recently that came out as a Notice of Funding Opportunity, NOFO, and we raised our hand and said, we're going to go after that to do that. Other examples is the STIF project. We know that there's a process for us to identify projects and seek after STIF funding for things. And last year we had some discretionary STIF projects that we went after. The most recent is the one I talked about, our MX, our BRT buses. So that's an example. So not all dollars that we get are formula, which some of those are discretionary. And when we say that, that's really the discretionary competitive ones.
Thank you. Seems like this is the kind of thing that'd be good for just the general community to understand a little bit about how the funding works and how everything gets paid for.
Sure.
So done a good job of it. Thank you.